Johnny Cash grew up in a large Arkansas family shaped by farm work, church music, and close sibling bonds, later marrying June Carter and joining a circle that included the Carter family and producer Sam Phillips. Family ties sustained Cash through early touring pressures, and collaboration with June Carter anchored his personal stability and stage presence. Friendships with artists across genres, including Bob Dylan and Chris Christopherson, placed Cash in a broad musical community that reached beyond Nashville's boundaries. Cash's public contributions linked country, folk, and rock audiences with plain-spoken storytelling and moral clarity. Early Sun Records sides introduced a spare, rhythmic drive, while later work addressed faith, prisons, and American memory. The prison concerts at Folsom and San Quentin expanded his cultural impact by bringing songs into carceral spaces and national television. His network television show presented a wide roster of guests, connecting rural and urban listeners. Late career recordings with producer Rick Rubin foregrounded voice and lyric, reframing Cash for new generations and reinforcing his status as an American standard bearer. Health problems accumulated in later years, including complications tied to diabetes and neuropathy, which affected mobility and touring. Cash continued to record in reduced circumstances, focusing on intimate arrangements and reflective repertoire. He died in the early 2000s in Nashville, only months after June Carter's death, closing a long partnership that had shaped both his life and public image. Cash is buried at Hendersonville Memory Gardens in Hendersonville, Tennessee, where his grave is near June Carter's and marked for steady visitation by fans. The site functions as a quiet memorial linked to nearby family and Opry history, accessible to those tracing the geography of Nashville music. The setting emphasizes continuity between performance and community, placing a widely recognized figure in a local cemetery visited year-round. The burial underscores how a national legacy can rest in a suburban Tennessee landscape that is integrated into everyday life. The modest setting balances the scale of Cash's recorded influence with the familial context that sustained his work from early years through final sessions. Hank Williams was raised in Alabama by a close-knit family, shaped by economic hardship and church music, leaning on his mother, Lily, for early guidance and management. Marriage to Audrey Shepard brought personal partnership and professional collaboration, though the relationship was turbulent and often mixed domestic strain with career decisions. Mentors like Rufus Payne, widely known as T-Tot, helped Williams develop a blues-influenced approach that informed his songwriting voice and stage presence. Williams's public contributions defined modern country songwriting through direct language, emotional precision, and memorable melodies. Radio and the Grand Ole Opry amplified songs that linked rural traditions to national audiences. Recordings such as mournful ballads and honky-tonk numbers set standards for narrative economy, turning personal trouble into widely relatable stories. Brief film shorts, road shows, and relentless touring extended his reach, while publishing and cover versions entrenched his catalog across regions and decades. Health and dependence issues worsened under the strain of travel and performance, leading to cancellations and professional setbacks. During a planned holiday appearance run, Williams died in the early 1950s while en route to a concert in West Virginia, a closing chapter marked by untended medical needs and long fatigue. The sudden end contrasted with ongoing demand for shows and recordings, leaving unfinished engagements and a grieving fan base. Williams is buried at Oakwood Annex Cemetery in Montgomery, Alabama, where a prominent monument and family markers anchor a pilgrimage point for historians and listeners. The site connects local roots to national remembrance, with regular visitors observing the headstone, offerings, and inscriptions that frame his short career. The burial in Montgomery affirms how a regional identity carried into national culture, placing a foundational figure of country music within the city that first organized and promoted his work. The monument's permanence contrasts with the brevity of a career that continues to inform songwriting craft and performance style. Patsy Cline grew up in Virginia within a working family that valued church singing and local radio, later marrying Charlie Dick, whose support and conflicts both shaped her career's pace. Nashville networks formed through producer Owen Bradley, the Jordanaires, and fellow artists provided a collaborative base that refined Cline's phrasing and repertoire. Friendships in the Opry community aided touring logistics, while mentors guided her transition from regional stages to national platforms. Cline's public contributions centered on a modern vocal approach that balanced emotional clarity with studio discipline. Sessions at Bradley's Quonset hut used countrypolitan arrangements, placing voice forward with restrained strings and background vocals. National television and radio broadened reach, while crossover singles demonstrated how country performance could carry pop polish without losing narrative directness. The catalog set a model for female vocalists navigating production, marketing, and sustained radio play in a changing music economy. Recovery from a serious automobile collision required careful management of touring and recording schedules. but Klein returned to work with renewed focus. In early 1963, a small plane carrying Klein and fellow performers encountered poor weather during regional travel. The crash ended a rising career and left a closely knit circle of musicians and family to manage the aftermath, including catalog stewardship and memorial events that confirmed her influence. Klein is buried at Shenandoah Memorial Park in Winchester, Virginia, where her grave and nearby historical markers draw steady visitation from local residents and travelers. The site, framed by family presence and community care, anchors a return to hometown ground after a career built largely through Nashville's studios and national stages. The burial in Winchester highlights a lasting balance between national recognition and regional identity. A voice that reshaped country recording standards rests within a community that fostered early performance, showing how local roots and careful studio craft combined to change the genre's sound. Loretta Lynn emerged from a coal mining community in Kentucky, marrying Oliver Lynn as a teenager and building a family while learning guitar and songwriting at home. The couple's partnership, complex but enduring, propelled early touring in the Pacific Northwest before Nashville publishers and producers noticed her sharp, observational writing. Collaboration with Conway Twitty created a durable duet brand, while friendships at the Grand Ole Opry and with fellow women artists sustained a supportive professional circle. Lynn's public contributions expanded country music's subject matter by addressing marriage dynamics, birth control, class, and women's autonomy with plain language. A steady run of singles and albums established a candid voice that matched honky-tonk energy with narrative detail. Radio play and television appearances affirmed broad appeal, even as certain stations resisted topical songs. Band records often returned stronger, illustrating a feedback loop between controversy and audience loyalty that widened the creative space for others. In later years, health setbacks limited touring and media activity, though Lynn continued to record selectively and participate in curated projects that revisited earlier material. Family and staff managed the ranch at Hurricane Mills, integrating museum exhibits, festival programming, and preservation efforts around her work. Lynn died in the early 2020s, closing a long period of home-centered recovery and intermittent public appearances. Lynn is buried at the Lynn Family Cemetery at Hurricane Mills, Tennessee, on the family estate that also houses her museum and historic property. The site draws steady visitors who connect studio releases and autobiographical songs with a physical landscape preserved by relatives and staff. Markers and guided routes frame a narrative of early hardship, national success, and home-rooted stewardship. The burial on family land underscores how Lynn's career joined public authorship to private place. Songs that describe domestic realities now rest within a working homestead, aligning recorded legacy, community engagement, and a preserved rural setting that shaped her point of view. Merle Haggard was raised in California by parents who had migrated from Oklahoma, a background that shaped his sense of place and class. After his father's death, Haggard's adolescence included truancy and short stints in custody that culminated in time at San Quentin, where exposure to structured music work redirected his path. Personal relationships, including marriages and close friendships with fellow Bakersfield musicians, provided both stability and creative impetus as studio opportunities emerged. Haggard's public contributions defined a Bakersfield sound marked by sharp Telecaster tones, steady backbeat, and clear vocal phrasing. Capitol releases brought narratives of work, law, and pride that resonated across regions during a period of social change. Songs balanced empathy for daily struggle with crisp arrangements that avoided heavy orchestration, distinguishing his catalog from Nashville's smoother productions. National touring, television appearances, and durable album cycles made Haggard a central figure whose writing entered common repertoire for later artists. Health issues appeared over time, including respiratory and cardiac complications that reduced travel and stage endurance. Even as touring slowed, Haggard recorded reflective material and maintained a road band identity built over decades. He died in the mid-2010s in California, closing a long run that had begun in small clubs and moved through major label arcs and independent work. Haggard is buried at the Haggard Family Ranch Cemetery near Palo Cedro, California, on private land associated with his home and workshop life. The setting reflects family continuity and the regional roots of the Bakersfield tradition, placing a widely known artist within a Northern California landscape tied to his later years. Visitors who reach the area often connect the grave to nearby performance history, studios, and venues linked to his circle. The private ranch burial aligns with the independent ethos Haggard championed. A career that underscored local sound and working narratives concludes in a family plot, reinforcing how regional identity and personal stewardship framed his influence on modern country music. George Jones grew up in East Texas within a working family that valued church singing and local radio, later forming bands that shaped early stagecraft. Marriages, especially to Tammy Wynette, intertwined personal life with public expectation, creating celebrated duets and a complex domestic history. Professional partnerships with producers and Nashville musicians refined Jones's phrasing, while friendships with peers sustained touring during unstable periods. Jones's public contributions centered on a distinctive vocal style that bent notes with conversational nuance, turning brief lines into detailed portraits of longing and regret. Landmark Recordings established a standard for country ballad interpretation and influenced singers across generations. Radio success, televised appearances, and persistent catalog sales maintained visibility through shifting trends. Industry recognition, including major awards and Hall of Fame honors, affirmed his standing as a definitive stylist in the genre. Health issues and substance struggles disrupted schedules and led to missed performances, a reputation he later worked to stabilize through renewed focus and management support. A serious motor vehicle incident and recurring respiratory problems signaled long-term strain from decades on the road. Jones died in the early 20-teens in Nashville after hospitalization, ending a career that had spanned small Texas venues to national stages. Jones is buried at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Nashville, Tennessee, where a substantial monument and landscape setting draw steady visitation. Public memorial services included peers and fans, underscoring broad respect for a voice closely associated with the core sound of country music. The gravesite sits among other notable artists, forming a concentrated map of Nashville's recording history. The Nashville burial situates a national legacy within the city that amplified his catalog, a highly personal singing style. Developed through regional roots and refined in professional studios, is commemorated in a cemetery that reflects the industry's shared memory. Tammy Wynette grew up in Mississippi within a rural family network that prized church singing and resilience, later marrying George Jones in a partnership that combined domestic life with duet success and public scrutiny. Earlier marriages and responsibilities as a young parent shaped her early work ethic, while close ties to producers, musicians, and songwriters in Nashville refined her stage presence and studio approach. Friendships with women artists at the Grand Ole Opry provided support during intense touring schedules. Wynette's public contributions defined the countrypolitan era with a voice that balanced strength and vulnerability, pairing traditional themes with orchestral arrangements and background vocals. Landmark Recordings became cultural touchstones, reinforcing her image as a leading interpreter of domestic narratives and heartache. Televised performances, variety show appearances, and sustained radio play expanded her reach, while duets with George Jones established a catalog that documented both harmony and strain. Industry awards and global touring affirmed long-term influence across audiences. Chronic health problems and medical procedures marked later years, leading to periods of reduced travel and carefully managed engagements. She continued recording and appearing selectively, supported by family and professional teams that coordinated treatment and media. Wynette died in the late 1990s in Nashville after ongoing health complications, closing a career that had remained visible despite frequent medical challenges. Wynette is buried at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Nashville, Tennessee, where her grave lies among fellow artists whose work shaped the city's recording identity. The site attracts steady visitation from listeners who associate her catalog with the polished sound of late 20th century country music. Markers and nearby memorials frame a shared cultural landscape connected to studios, the Opry, and broadcast history. The Nashville burial aligns a national profile with the city that consolidated her career. A voice that carried domestic themes to broad audiences rests within a cemetery that maps the genre's institutional memory, reflecting how personal narrative and polished production moved country music into mainstream consciousness. Waylon Jennings grew up in West Texas within a close musical community centered on radio and dance halls, marrying Jessie Coulter and forming a partnership that joined personal life to a circle of independent-minded artists. Early work as a bassist for Buddy Holly connected Jennings to rock and roll touring practices and studio discipline, lessons that later shaped band leadership. Friendships with Willie Nelson, Chris Christopherson, and Tom Paul Glaser strengthened an artistic coalition that favored autonomy in sound and business. Jennings's public contributions defined the outlaw country movement by insisting on creative control over production, song choice, and album design. He pushed back against heavy orchestration, favoring rhythm section clarity, baritone presence, and Telecaster bite. Albums and tours established a self-contained brand with cohesive visuals and consistent road personnel. National attention followed, with chart success and televised visibility that carried the outlaw model from local stages to mainstream audiences while preserving a rough-edged studio aesthetic. Health issues accumulated over time, including complications related to long touring and chronic conditions that reduced mobility and endurance. After a period of managed performances, Jennings scaled back activity and focused on family and selective studio work in Arizona. He died in the early 2000s in the Phoenix area, closing a career that had set a durable template for artist-led production in country music. Jennings is buried at the City of Mesa Cemetery in Mesa, Arizona, where his grave reflects family proximity and a southwestern base that anchored later life. The site receives regular visitors who associate the headstone and inscriptions with the outlaw era's independent stance. Placement in Mesa ties a national legacy to regional ground rather than to Nashville's institutional settings. The Arizona burial reinforces Jennings's commitment to self-determination. A movement that challenged centralized control is remembered in a local cemetery far from Music Row, underscoring how regional residence and artistic autonomy shaped his enduring influence. Charlie Daniels was raised in North Carolina within a circle of church music, string bands, and small-town radio, later marrying Hazel Daniels, whose steady presence anchored touring life and business routines. Early collaborations in Nashville and Los Angeles linked Daniels to session work and songwriting partnerships, including contributions to rock and country artists that broadened his craft. The Charlie Daniels Band formed a stable road unit with long-standing colleagues who shaped arrangements and stage dynamics over decades. Daniels's public contributions fused Southern rock and country, pairing fiddle leads with twin guitar textures and a rhythm section built for arena-scale shows. National touring grew through festival circuits, military base concerts, and charity events that emphasized community engagement. Sessions and television appearances extended recognition beyond radio, while annual volunteer efforts and disaster relief concerts underscored a civic profile alongside musical output. His catalog became a fixture of sports arenas, regional fairs, and classic rock formats that overlapped with country playlists. In later years, Daniels managed chronic health issues, including heart procedures that required careful scheduling and recovery. He continued to perform with measured frequency, aided by a disciplined crew and road management shaped by long experience. Daniels died in the early 2020s in Tennessee following a stroke, closing a career marked by consistent touring and public outreach. Daniels is buried at Mount Juliet Memorial Gardens in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, near the community where he lived and worked. The gravesite sits within a suburban landscape tied to Nashville's recording economy, drawing visitors who associate the headstone with enduring live performance and regional philanthropy. Markers reflect family closeness and the band identity that defined his public image. The Mount Juliet burial places a national touring presence within a local setting that supported his operations. The site's accessibility and community ties mirror a career that balanced high visibility with steady regional roots. Glenn Campbell grew up in Arkansas within a large sharecropping family that prized guitar playing and harmony singing, later marrying multiple times and raising children who experienced his demanding studio and touring cycles. Early relocation to Los Angeles placed Campbell inside the Wrecking Crew, a circle of elite session musicians whose reliability forged friendships and professional trust. Collaborations with arrangers and producers created a network that sustained his transition from sideman to featured artist and television host. Campbell's public contributions bridged country, pop, and easy listening through clean guitar lines, clear tenor, and polished orchestration. As a first-call session player, he supported hits for major artists while refining timing and tone. Solo recordings with story-driven lyrics reached wide audiences, and his variety television program brought country musicians and mainstream entertainers onto the same stage. Film roles and guest appearances extended visibility, while concert tours showcased technical virtuosity that many younger guitarists later studied. In later years, Campbell faced cognitive decline that he and his family acknowledged publicly, documenting a final tour that balanced transparency with musical purpose. Performances were adjusted to support memory and focus, with relatives and bandmates providing structure on stage and off. Campbell died in the late 20-teens after a lengthy illness, closing a career that had remained in view through changing formats and audiences. Campbell is buried at the Campbell Family Cemetery in Billstown, Arkansas, near his birthplace, within a rural setting connected to early family life. The gravesite anchors remembrance to local geography rather than to Los Angeles or Nashville, drawing visitors who link the headstone to formative years and hometown continuity. Modest markers and community context align with the family narrative preserved by relatives. The Arkansas burial places a widely known television and recording figure back within the community that shaped his first musical habits. A national career that moved through studios, arenas, and screens concludes in a family plot, reinforcing how early environment and disciplined craft carried Campbell from farm fields to enduring influence. Conway Twitty grew up in Arkansas and Mississippi within a working family that valued church singing and baseball, later marrying multiple times while maintaining close ties to children and business partners. Early bandmates and managers supported a shift from rock and roll beginnings to Nashville country, where producers and writers helped refine phrasing and repertoire. A durable duet partnership with Loretta Lynn added a relational dimension that shaped public image and touring logistics, creating a dependable circle of musicians, arrangers, and stage crew. Twitty's public contributions centered on smooth baritone delivery, narrative ballads, and a prolific chart presence that set records for sustained radio success. Studiocraft emphasized controlled dynamics, conversational pacing, and careful string arrangements that carried adult themes without excess. Television appearances and consistent touring reinforced a brand that balanced romantic material with honky-tonk roots, while business ventures, including real estate and entertainment properties, funded independence and catalog stewardship. In the early 1990s, Twitty collapsed on the road after a performance, reflecting long years of travel and a demanding schedule. He was hospitalized with serious complications and died shortly afterward, closing a career built on relentless recording, touring discipline, and close professional partnerships. The sudden end underscored how constant work had driven visibility while straining health. Twitty is buried at Sumner Memorial Gardens in Gallatin, Tennessee, within the Nashville orbit that supported his studio and business operations. The gravesite sits near markers for family members and receives steady visitation from fans who associate the headstone with duet milestones and a long run of solo hits. Memorials at the site and in nearby venues frame a clear link between regional infrastructure and national recognition. The Gallatin burial places a prolific hitmaker inside the community that sustained his enterprise. A catalog that moved seamlessly from rock-inflected youth to mature country balladry is commemorated in a suburban cemetery connected to the everyday roots of Nashville's music economy. Buck Owens grew up in the Southwest within a family that moved for work, building early ties to bar bands and radio that fostered practical musicianship. Marriage and partnerships with bandmates like Don Rich created a tight ensemble identity that shaped arrangements on stage and in the studio. Bakersfield friendships and independent business relationships, including local radio and club owners, supported a network that favored autonomy over distant label control. Owens's public contributions defined the Bakersfield sound with bright Telecasters, minimal strings, and a firm backbeat suited to dance halls and truck radios. Capitol sessions emphasized clarity, harmony vocals, and efficient song forms that traveled well on regional airwaves. Television exposure through variety programming brought country performers into living rooms across the nation, while business ventures in publishing, radio stations, and venues reinforced financial independence. The model demonstrated how artist-led production and local infrastructure could rival central Nashville systems. A plane crash that killed Don Rich marked a turning point in Owens's sound and momentum, and later health issues limited touring intensity. He continued to record and perform selectively, maintaining a presence through club ownership and curated appearances that honored earlier catalog strengths. Owens died in the mid-2000s in California after a period of reduced activity, closing a career that linked regional studios to national recognition. Owens is buried at Greenlawn Southwest Cemetery in Bakersfield, California, where the gravesite connects directly to the city most associated with his music and business operations. Visitors encounter markers that reference band identity, local venues, and the television era that expanded his reach. The setting aligns with museums and historic sites that document Bakersfield's role in shaping a distinct country sound. The Bakersfield burial affirms a legacy built on local control, clear sonics, and durable working relationships. A catalog that resisted heavy orchestration rests in the city that enabled independent recording and touring, preserving a practical blueprint for country music outside Nashville's primary institutions. Marty Robbins grew up in Arizona within a large family shaped by Western storytelling and church music, later marrying Marizona Baldwin, whose support anchored long stretches of touring and recording. Grand Ole Opry relationships and steady band personnel stabilized Robbins' show format, while friendships with songwriters and Nashville producers broadened his repertoire. Outside music, stock car racing introduced a second circle of colleagues and sponsors that influenced scheduling and public appearances. Robbins' public contributions blended Western narratives with versatile vocal styles that ranged from crooning ballads to up-tempo country and pop-influenced arrangements. Story songs evoked frontier imagery with precise diction and memorable melodies, while studio work applied careful orchestration that kept voice forward. He moved comfortably between honky-tonk numbers, romantic ballads, and Latin-tinged pieces, demonstrating a flexibility that influenced later crossover efforts. Opry stages, national television, and consistent radio play sustained visibility across changing formats. Cardiac problems emerged in middle age, requiring surgeries and periods of reduced activity that were managed around recording and racing interests. Robbins returned to stages whenever health allowed, maintaining a disciplined approach to set lists and travel. He died in the early 1980s in Nashville after heart complications, closing a career that had balanced musical breadth with public affection for Western-themed storytelling. Robbins is buried at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Nashville, Tennessee, where his grave sits among peers who define the city's recording legacy. The site attracts visitors who link the headstone to Opry history, chart success, and a distinctive catalog that fused narrative sweep with studio craft. Nearby markers for fellow artists create a compact map of mid-century country music. The Nashville burial situated a Western-themed voice within the industry center that amplified his songs. A writer and performer who bridged regional imagery and national media rests among colleagues whose work shaped the same era, underscoring how studio precision carried frontier narratives to broad audiences. Roger Miller grew up in Oklahoma within a farming family sustained by relatives after early hardship, developing quick wit and musical agility through school bands and military service. Marriage and friendships in Nashville, including ties to Chet Atkins and fellow writers, gave Miller access to studio sessions and honky-tonk circuits where his inventive phrasing took shape. Mentorships and publisher relationships supported a move from sideman and songwriter to featured performer, with steady collaborators refining arrangements that matched his rhythmic wordplay. Miller's public contributions joined humor and pathos with economical songwriting, using conversational rhyme, syncopation, and vivid character sketches. Breakthrough singles demonstrated how minimal lyrics and sharp timing could carry strong melodic hooks, while deeper cuts revealed a reflective writer beneath comic surfaces. Television appearances and Broadway work expanded his audience, confirming range that reached beyond country radio while keeping Southern idiom and acoustic textures close at hand. Awards and cover versions secured his standing as a writer's writer across genres. Health problems emerged after years of travel and persistent work habits, leading to periods of reduced activity and medical treatment. He continued to compose and appear selectively, focusing on projects that emphasized narrative craft and ensemble chemistry. Miller died in the early 1990s, leaving a compact but influential catalog managed by family and publishing partners who preserved his distinctive voice. Miller is buried at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Nashville, Tennessee, where his grave lies among peers from the same recording community. Visitors often connect the headstone to nearby markers for collaborators, tracing a geography of studios, publishers, and stages that supported his career. The site functions as a quiet index of mid-century creative networks within the city. The Nashville burial places a writer known for brevity and wit in the center of the industry that recognized his craft. A catalog that balanced levity and depth is memorialized beside colleagues who shared sessions and stages, confirming how precise language and rhythmic invention reshaped country songwriting. Roy Acuff grew up in Tennessee within a family that valued church singing, fiddle tunes, and community gatherings, later marrying Mildred Douglas and maintaining close ties to kin who supported travel and early radio appearances. Partnerships with the Smoky Mountain Boys and friendships at the Grand Ole Opry formed a stable circle that shaped arrangements, stage pacing, and repertoire choices. Collaboration with Fred Rose created a publishing alliance that joined artistic mentorship with business structure. Acuff's public contributions centered on clear vocal delivery, fiddle-featured arrangements, and a repertoire that linked Appalachian tradition to national radio. As a leading figure at the Grand Ole Opry, he helped standardize touring practices, stage professionalism, and artist presentation for growing audiences. The publishing company he co-founded advanced songwriter rights, expanded catalogs, and stabilized income for performers who had relied on uncertain road receipts. His presence gave the Opry a ceremonial anchor, connecting visiting acts to a shared sense of format and continuity. In advanced age, Acuff reduced touring but remained a visible ambassador at the Opry, greeting audiences and mentoring younger performers. Health limitations gradually curtailed appearances, though he continued short segments and community engagements that emphasized hospitality and institutional memory. He died in the early 1990s in Nashville, closing a long period of stewardship that kept tradition and business development in balance. Acuff is buried at Spring Hill Cemetery in Nashville, Tennessee, where a prominent monument and family plot mark his role in the city's musical life. The gravesite receives steady visitors who associate the headstone with the Opry's formative decades, the rise of professional publishing, and the preservation of regional repertoire on national stages. The Nashville burial situates an emblem of the Opry within the city whose institutions he strengthened. A career that combined performance, mentorship, and infrastructure building is memorialized in a cemetery that maps the industry's core, reflecting how organizational leadership can shape musical heritage for generations. Kitty Wells grew up in Nashville within a musical family that performed at church and local gatherings, marrying Johnny Wright and building a family band that included sisterly harmonies and steady road routines. The partnership with Wright provided managerial stability, duet opportunities, and a shared touring economy that supported children and extended relatives. Friendships within the Grand Ole Opry community formed a dependable network of musicians, songwriters, and radio hosts who shaped repertoire and booking. Wells's public contributions opened the door for women as headline artists in country music. Early recordings used plain-spoken lyrics that challenged double standards while retaining traditional melodic forms. Radio play and jukebox traffic confirmed audience demand for a woman's perspective delivered with measured resolve rather than theatrical display. Sustained chart presence, national tours, and television appearances established a template for professional autonomy, influencing production decisions and marketing for later generations of female singers. In later years, Wells reduced touring and focused on family-centered projects, occasional recordings, and appearances that honored earlier milestones. Health concerns gradually limited travel and stage time, though she remained a respected figure at commemorative events and industry gatherings. Wells died in the early 2010s in Tennessee, closing a long period of quiet retirement supported by close family ties. Wells is buried at Spring Hill Cemetery in Nashville, Tennessee, within a family plot that includes Johnny Wright and relatives from their performing circle. The gravesite sits near markers for other Opry-era figures, creating a compact map of mid-century country history. Visitors often connect the headstone to the moment when women moved from guest features to sustained headlining roles. The Nashville burial aligns a barrier-breaking career with the city that amplified her voice. A measured, resolute approach to subject matter is commemorated in a cemetery that reflects institutional memory, underscoring how one singer's success widened opportunity across the genre.